Hi, and welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, power plants killing us silently with their soot. Also, feeding farm animals antibiotics. Does that make these wonder drugs less effective in combating disease in humans? Indie and foreign films aren't dead, at least not at a new cinema house, lounge, and bistro in DC called Visions. Liz Lerman hosts Masters of Cambodian Dance, and O. Henry Award winner Patricia Elam discusses her new novel, Breathing Room. We've got music by the Jesse Palidofsky Group, a Laurie Sang poem, and more. Welcome to the Forum at the Coffee House. Olympics 2012 in the DC Baltimore area. Mayors Williams and O'Malley are hot to host the Summer Games. I'd like it, but the athletes might breathe a lot easier if the games were held elsewhere. That's because the air around here can be lethal, literally. This study found that power plants are the chief source of sulfates in the air, that over 30,000 people a year die prematurely due to these fine particle pollutants emitted by power plants. And the DC-Baltimore metro region is the second most hazardous area in the country after New York. And what's more, lots of these early deaths could be prevented, or so argues Mark Wenzler, environmental counsel at the National Environmental Trust. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thanks, nice to be here.
I should say that representatives from PEPCO and the Edison Electric Institute were invited to attend and declined to do so. Let's start out by finding out exactly what these fine particle pollutants are. What are they?
Well, fine particles are formed in the atmosphere in a complex chemical reaction, but essentially they are created by sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, which are both emitted by power plants. And they are particles that are about 2.5 microns in diameter, and that's really kind of hard to understand. So the way we like to think of it is...
Can we see it without a microscope?
No, you need a microscope to see it. Think of a human hair, the width of a human hair, it's 1/100th of that width. So these things are so small that they actually evade the lungs' natural defenses. Larger particles are usually expelled when you cough, but these small particles evade those systems, and they can enter right into your bloodstream. This is why they're so dangerous.
Now, is this all power plants, or I understand that some power plants that have been built subsequent to, say, 1977, 1978 are less dirty because they are subject to the Clean Air Act. However, those built before 1977 are not?
That's correct. Power plants built before 1977 can often emit up to 10 times more pollution than modern coal plants. That's because of a loophole in the Clean Air Act of 1977. The assumption at the time was that these plants would retire and be replaced by cleaner, newer energy sources. However, that hasn't occurred, and 25 years later, these plants are still operating. And the worst of these plants are the ones that burn coal, because coal has a lot of impurities in it and is the largest source of sulfur dioxide pollution when it's burned. So we're really talking about these older plants that burn coal that predate 1977.
And what about the plants in the DC, Baltimore, Maryland, Virginia area? How many of these are the old pre-1977 generation plants? How many are modern?
Most of the plants in our region do predate the Clean Air Act of 1977, so they are these older grandfathered plants that need to be cleaned up. And the bigger problem, however, is that most of the plants to our south and to our west are older plants. There's a huge number of these big coal plants in the Ohio Valley and to the south in Tennessee and Georgia, and we're at the tail end of the prevailing winds from those plants. And so we not only get the emissions from our own plants, but we get them from plants many hundreds of miles away.
EPA wants to regulate these particulate matter, but the DC Court of Appeals ruled that EPA overstepped its authority in trying to regulate in this area, and that Congress did not authorize EPA to act in this way. That case is before the Supreme Court. What will be the impact of that decision?
Well, ironically, that case was actually argued on Election Day, for better or worse. And I think there's a couple of things you can say about the case. First of all, the lower court upheld EPA's science on the fine particles. It held that EPA has shown that fine particles are dangerous and that they kill. What they did was overrule EPA's rule on a fairly arcane constitutional grounds. It remains to be seen what the court will do, but we're hopeful they will uphold EPA's standard and that the agency can continue to implement it as it is trying to do now.
Now, the situation in the DC-Baltimore area is worse, in fact, than if you were to take DC, Maryland, or Virginia separately, isn't it?
That's correct.
Why would that be?
Well, you're looking at a greater population. There's really two variables that go into which areas are impacted the most heavily. One is the number of coal-burning power plants in that area, and second is the population, the size of the population that is at the receiving end of the pollution. And we happen to have a very large population in this area, and be at the receiving end of a lot of pollution from coal-fired power plants. So the combination of those two factors gives us a very high impact, second only, as you said, to New York.
One issue that does emerge is that people who live closer to power plants are more likely to be affected negatively by the emissions of those plants. And demographically, this breaks out in a particular way, does it not? That people who are more low income tend to live near power plants, I gather. Is there some basis to challenge these power plant emissions based upon the location of the plants themselves?
Well, I think you do find community groups around the country, and particularly in this area, that are concerned about the power plants in their backyard. In fact, we were over at the Pepco plant on Benning Road in D.C. last month to release the report, and the community there has been organized and concerned about that plant for 15 years now. So I think there is some concern about local impacts, and you usually will find groups that live near those plants that have been concerned and organized and fighting those plants for many years.
No death certificate ever says died due to power plant emissions. And in fact, this study extrapolates data. How do you really know that people are dying from power plant emissions and getting sick from power plant emissions, especially in the context of DC being the second most congested roadways in the country, Baltimore being the 11th most congested roadways in the country, and these are also contributors to bad air, aren't they?
Well, the link between power plant pollution and death goes back, probably 50 years. I mean, we saw in London in the 1950s, smoke from burning of coal was trapped in the city for several days, and at the end of that period, about 3,000 people had died. So we know that breathing in that kind of pollution is bad for us. And what we've done since the 1950s really is only raise the height of the stack, so that pollution is being dispersed in a greater area. But that hasn't done away with the problem. People are still dying. It's happening over a much greater period. You're not having those direct impacts like you did in 1950s in London, but the body count is there. It's just totaled up around the country, and what you're seeing is the fine particles from those power plants in the Ohio Valley, in Georgia, affecting our area. I say to an equal extent that cars do. I mean, surely cars are a problem, but they're not the only problem. And EPA is doing a lot of things to clean up pollution from cars. What they need to do is clean up pollution from power plants as well.
And what is the fix here? Is it ending this grandfathering in of these old power plants under the Clean Air Act so they're exempt from the Clean Air Act? Is there something else that should be done?
That's part of it. That's the good place to start. But we also need to put reasonable caps on the pollutants emitted by these facilities. What we're calling for is a 75% reduction in sulfur and nitrogen from power plants. And by our estimates, that will save nearly 2/3 of the lives, the 30,000 lives each year that are lost due to power plant pollution. And that's more than are saved by seatbelts each year.
And what's the likelihood do you see this happening?
Well, we built a lot of momentum in Congress last year. We had 110, I believe, co-sponsors on a power plant bill in the House, and we believe we'll continue to build momentum in the next legislative session. Both candidates Bush and Gore have called for cleaning up power plant pollution, so we're optimistic that whoever wins the contest will do something about power plant pollution.
All right. Well, thanks to Mark Wenzler from the National Environmental Trust for joining us in the coffee house. There's some good news to report. U.S. EPA and the Federal Department of Energy plan to unveil a new power plant at Fort Meade, Maryland in 2002 that will generate electricity without any combustion whatsoever using a fuel cell gas turbine hybrid system. Still to come, why Danes stopped feeding antibiotics to most farm animals. New visions for cinema and nightlife in D.C. Liz Lerman hosts Cambodian heritage dancers, poet Laurie Sang, and award-winning author Patricia Elam. But first, the Jesse Palidofsky Group.
loafing on the street for such a very long time. But now the doors are opening your way. Dark cloud around you for so very many years. Don't look now, hey, a sunshiny day. Pájaro blanco va volando sobre nubes negras. Abre los ojos, abre las alas, ya puedes volar. Here we go. Didn't score in the lottery. It ain't no brand new Cadillac. Life wasn't saved by rock and roll. It ain't in no guru book. And it's not sweet romance. There's a power to heal the wounded soul. No, no, no. White bird flying above the dark clouds. Open your eyes, spread your wings, you can fly. Na 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 ba 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 da ba 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 da 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 ba ba. Oh no do do.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health at the Coffee House. They were the wonder drugs of the 20th century. We came to rely on antibiotics like penicillin to knock out our bacterial bugs cold. But doctors now fear these bugs are growing resistant, and no wonder. Antibiotics aren't just in our medicine chests. Farmers regularly feed them to livestock and poultry. A problem? The Food and Drug Administration thinks so. The FDA wants to ban a whole class of these antibiotics from animal use altogether. Drug manufacturer Bayer Corporation is challenging the ban. And farmers warn that without antibiotics, their animals will be less healthy and the price of meat will rise dramatically. Perhaps, but the experience in Denmark suggests otherwise, or so argues Bente Wantzin, First Secretary of Food, Agriculture and Fisheries at the Danish Embassy in Washington. She's joined by Steven Fondriest, a spokesman for the Union of Concerned Scientists, and they'll speak about this subject. Welcome to the Coffee House. We invited some industry officials to participate, but they declined this evening. Steven, how does giving animals, such as cows, chickens, pigs, antibiotics in their feed on a regular basis, sometimes every day of their life, how does this affect the way that we get treated with antibiotics to kill bugs?
What we're having today is the rise of antibiotic or drug resistance in a number of bacteria, foodborne bacteria such as Salmonella and Campylobacter. Farmers and livestock producers are giving antibiotics such as you said, penicillin, tetracycline, in low doses over perhaps the entire lifespan of an animal. And the exposure to these antibiotics daily to of bacteria is causing bacteria to develop resistance to these antibiotics. If we consume these bacteria now that have resistance to particular drugs and we get sick, when we go to a doctor and are treated, the doctor finds out often that the antibiotics are no longer effective in treating those diseases such as Salmonella.
We're meant to cook our food properly, but I mean, people are always going to slip up. You have a barbecue, you don't quite cook it through. Are these bugs passed on quite often to humans?
It's very readily. There's estimates of over 2 million cases of salmonella food poisoning in the United States every year. More than 18,000 people will be hospitalized because of salmonella, and hundreds die.
Without the preventative medicine, though, wouldn't these animals be disease-ridden? Wouldn't the cost of our meat go up? And wouldn't we actually eat more of the bugs?
That's what industry will say, but I'm not quite sure that's always true. As hopefully we'll hear in a little bit, there have been people in Europe and also the United States have used other practices. They've increased the quality of the food, they've increased the sanitation within the barnyards where animals are kept, and many farmers have found that it's not necessary to give these low doses of antibiotics just to raise a healthy animal.
Humans are to blame as well, I guess, for this story, because they don't finish their medicines, they take a lower dose, they forget.
Right. It's the World Health Organization has declared that we are possibly entering an era where we will no longer have effective antibiotics to treat diseases. The cause is, for many cases, is the overuse or the misuse of antibiotics by humans in medical conditions. But when it comes to foodborne diseases, most people point to the use purely for growth promotion of antibiotics in livestock production as the main culprit for the development of disease resistance.
So it makes the animal grow faster and get to market better, and that's keeping our price of meat down.
That's the idea, but it's not necessarily true. There have been a number of studies done, the National Research Council here in the United States last year, and also some researchers in the Midwest have looked at what would happen if you completely remove all growth promoters from animal production. And they're not finding great increases in the price of meat. Perhaps in a study done in the Midwest, 5 cents per pound for the cost of pork.
Briefly, why don't they just invent a new antibiotic? I mean,
that is possible and that does happen, but what we're seeing right now is that the pipeline for new antibiotics has slowed down basically to a trickle. There's less research going in, research and development dollars going into the development of new antibiotics. This has been occurring since the 1980s. And so we really can't just guarantee that we are going to have a new miracle drug coming up in the future to solve problems when antibiotics become ineffective because of resistance development.
Now, Bente, Denmark tried something different. Can you explain what's been going on in Denmark?
Well, yes, because of consumer concerns, the animal food producers decided in 1998 to discontinue the use of antibiotics as growth promoters in animal feed. Before that happened, we had banned 2 kinds of antibiotics before that. And the agreement was voluntarily, so it's done on a voluntary basis.
They were basically forerunners in this experiment for a whole country to do it.
Yes.
And what has been the result?
Well, the result has been very good. The consumer prices have not increased, and there have been very limited health problems with the animals. And they have been taken care of like you do normally when you have health problems with your animals.
You could give them antibiotics if they're sick.
Yes, you can do that, but it's under supervision of a veterinarian, of course. Yes.
And is this something they'll just continue then? I suppose, unless the animals suddenly start getting very sick, but you say they're not breaking out in illness all over.
Well, it's been very limited. Of course, there have been, in poultry production, there have been no changes, but I guess you could say maybe a small change has been in the hog and swine production. It's been 1 out of 10 that had problems, but they have been managed.
Yeah. What are the chances of the US trying something like this?
We would hope that the chances are good, although it's going to be an upwards fight for this to occur. But the United States government is making steps forward to dealing with this problem of drug resistance, looking for alternatives, and we can only hope that in the future they'll what is needed is that now they need to invest more money and more resources into developing alternatives for finding alternatives for the use of antibiotics.
Right, and changing farming practices and giving more space to the animals. They don't
Right.
catch germs from each other. Bente, some other countries are now already following Denmark, aren't they, in this practice?
Yes,
For
the
example?
Nordic countries. In fact, Sweden is like 10 years ahead of us. And if you look at the other EU countries, they have followed us as well. 9 antibiotics were used. 5 of them are banned now within the whole EU.
And we're not seeing bugs break out. This is perhaps a surprising result, that the animals are remaining so healthy without all the help of modern medicine. What about further than the meat, the problem of the antibiotics going into the manure and then going into the ground, then coming in our drinking water? It's not just perhaps something that's affecting us through what we eat, but also what we drink. Can you comment on that, either of you?
Well,
Is there an issue?
We think it is, although this is sort of the great big black box. No one has really started to seriously look at this problem of when antibiotics are given to animals, what happens next? The antibiotics pass in the waste. Bacteria that are resistant to these antibiotics also pass in the waste. And when they enter the environment, which they will, and they do, what happens? And there have been a number of studies in Europe and also in the United States that are beginning to show that these antibiotics and these resistant bacteria can be fairly pervasive in the environment.
And that's a whole other issue for another evening. Well, a big thank you to Denmark's Bente Wantzin and Steven Fondriest of the Union of Concerned Scientists for joining me in the coffee house. Still ahead, a visit to the new Visions Cinema Lounge and Bistro. Liz Lerman looks at Cambodian dance in America, poet Laurie Sang, and author Patricia Elam. I'm Cathy Kristiansen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
Hi, and welcome to Rewind at the Coffee House. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, people like me went to what we called art movies. You know, foreign films, classic films, offbeat films, and then everything changed. Videotape, VCRs, soaring real estate values, blockbusters, special effects, cineplexes, and those old movie houses closed. But hey, we were tired of eating stale popcorn and having our feet stick to the floor and watching scratchy, spliced film anyway. So now, at the end of that whole story, a new one's beginning. This one's happening at a place called, appropriately, Visions. It's near DuPont Circle in downtown DC. Visions is that old-fashioned movie house where you can still see that offbeat movie, that international film, that movie you can talk about afterwards. Filmmakers you've heard about from film festival awards, like Iranian director Abbas Kiarostami and the Chilean director Raul Ruiz. And then you can stay and talk about it, since Visions is also a bistro of sorts. Coffee, drinks, treats, and no stale popcorn. Plus, if you get an idea on the way home or you want to suggest a film Visions should show, just join the crowd on the website. The Visions website's discussion board is full of comments and suggestions from passionate, dedicated filmgoers. I think these people have tapped into something. We've invited the folks who launched Visions here to tell us the inside story of turning a languishing urban landmark into a destination. Please welcome Andrew Frank and Andrew Mencher to the Coffee House. Andrew Frank, thank you very much for joining us this
Thanks
evening.
for having us.
Tell me, how did this whole concept come together for you?
Well, it's kind of strange. You can plan as much as you want, but in reality, fate has a large part to do with it. There just happened to be a void in the marketplace in Washington, D.C. for seeing films when the Biograph Theater and the Key Theater closed. And while that was happening, I was looking to grow my coffee house into another location, and I realized that Washington already had enough coffee houses, so I wanted to build some type of place that would bring people in to really make it special. And I ended up with film because films were a passion of mine since I was in high school. When I grew up in Cincinnati, I used to hang out in the art house there that was called The Movies, and then in Boston at the Coolidge Corner Cinema, and what was called the Nickelodeon, which has been bought by somebody else. And Boston was a great film town. They had the Brattle Theater, and it was an old theater, and it really inspired me with a love of film. And I just thought, unlike a bookstore coffee house kind of concept where people actually have to read, at you can just look at the pictures at the coffee house and movie theater combination, and we actually put a lounge in the Visions as well, because one thing I found when I was in Europe is that you could buy a beer or a glass of wine and take it to your seat, and why shouldn't you be able to do that here? And we actually do that. So we have a full bar at Visions, and you can take the drinks to your seat in the theater.
Well, you took over a place that was really kind of falling apart and turned it into something. What were the biggest hurdles of doing that?
What was easy about it? There really was nothing easy about it. I mean, we had to raise a lot of money. It was an extremely expensive project, and we had to convince the landlords, who were very old guard Washingtonians, that this was a concept that would really work for them and that they should help us with the build-out costs. And the financing obstacles were certainly very difficult, but fortunately, this gentleman sitting right next to me came to the call after he'd read an article in the Washington Post about what I was trying to do, and after I met him, I knew that I would have someone who really understood the film business to help make this concept work.
Well, Andy, Mencher, you're really a programming pro here. Tell me something about how you're picking the movies for Visions.
Well, it's not an easy process. That's the most important thing. That's the place to start. It's, as Andrew identified, there was the necessity in Washington, D.C. for something like Visions. And we knew that something like Visions could succeed, and I'm very confident that it will succeed and continue to succeed in the future, because Washington, D.C. has always supported art films, and there were great independent theaters in the past, and they had to close for whatever reasons, and so Visions presented us an opportunity to bring these kinds of movies back into Washington.
What's an example of the kind of movie you're showing these days?
Well, we've just finished our third month, and we've shown probably foreign films from maybe 10 different countries already, and there's a tremendous appetite in Washington for foreign movies. Because of the international population that's here.
So you find that the people from the international population in question go to them. So is it kind of balkanized? Is it like the Indians are going to go to the Indian movie, the Dutch people go to the Dutch movie?
To some extent, but there are people who just generally like to go to see foreign films or independent or things that are different. And I also think that Andrew has created a location that's so exciting that the location itself will actually bring people to it. But to answer your question from before, we've shown things, we've shown Indian films, French films. We have films coming up that are going to be, we're doing a German film festival in January. We're going to be showing a Korean film in February, an independent American film in January as well. We're showing a documentary called One Day in September, which is going to be coming up in December, which is a fabulous movie about the 1972 Olympics in Germany.
Maybe we could take a look at that clip.
Ich habe den Eindruck, den ich gewonnen hatte, ist, dass sie wirklich daran geglaubt hatten, ihre Forderung erfüllen zu können. Ich war vom politischen Standpunkt der Meinung, dass das zu 99,9% unmöglich war. Und für die israelische Strategie war es sogar, wenn es sein muss, hätten sie auch ihre gesamten Sportlerteam in Kauf genommen. Und das habe ich versucht, den Isa zu erklären. Und er war sehr skeptisch, überhaupt durch mein Erscheinen, wer bist du?
Israel remained adamant that no deal could be struck with the terrorists. But to buy time, the negotiators lied to Isa, saying they were still awaiting a definitive answer from Jerusalem.
It was the Academy Award winner, and it would only be playing at Visions for 1 week, and that's one of the unfortunate realities of the film business, is that although we would love to, and we are going to play a tremendous amount of movies over the next years to come, some of them only play for a short period of time because the audiences for specific things are sometimes smaller, although if you can find that audience, then you can hopefully do well with your business, which is what we hope for.
So you've got quite a range. We've taken a look at a documentary. You've also got a film,
Sure.
Chutney Popcorn.
Chutney
Is that
popcorn,
right?
yeah.
And what's Chutney Popcorn about?
Well, this is actually a really fun one because not only do we deal with dozens of independent distribution companies, and there are so many of them out there, but Chutney Popcorn is actually a movie that is being distributed by the makers of the film, and they contacted us directly. It's a gay and lesbian film. It's about a relationship between an Indian woman and her partner. It gets very complicated with her familial relationships and her with her sister and having a surrogate mother, sort of a thing. But the beautiful thing about the film is because it's Indian and it crosses over into different people that might want to come see it, and it's very exciting to do a film that's where we're working directly with the producers, directors, actors in the film. They'll come to Visions, they'll be there. They'll help promote it, which is really tremendous.
Terrific. Andrew Frank?
I was going to say it was a great thing that he was able to get that film, because I had read the review in the New York Times about a week or two before he told me about it, and I said, Andy, let's get this film. And he called me up and said, I've got great news for you. They called us.
Now, tell me, in the old days, you could see also themed retrospectives. You could follow directors' careers. Is that also the kind of thing you're looking at, or
I hope so.
Are we getting more of a smorgasbord?
I hope so. We would love to be able to do that. And if Visions can succeed, it can do really well, then we have the opportunity to do even more and be even more diverse in our programming. We'd love to do retrospectives. We'd love to do festivals of sorts. And if people support the theater, we absolutely will.
Terrific. Well, Andrew Frank, tell me, what's been the most surprising part of this for you?
Well, I would say that would have to be the fact that when we were going to raise money for this project, which was, I think I had referred to that being a very daunting process before, we decided that we would try to go out into the community in order to raise some money. And one of my friends is Carla Cohen, who owns the Politics and Prose bookstore. And I had talked to her about the idea of raising money because I had heard that she had done this for her coffee house from her customers. And I thought,
We're almost out of time, Andrew.
I thought that was a great idea. So we actually had a founding membership program, and we were able to raise over $100,000 in community memberships. And
Fantastic.
That was great.
Congratulations.
Thank
That's unfortunately all we have time for. Many thanks to Andrew Frank and Andrew Mencher for joining me at the Coffee House. I'm Pat Aufderheide, and this has been Rewind.
Hi, and welcome to In Step at the Coffee House. Dance is as varied as the people who perform it, from the high-energy, whole-body expressiveness of some of our African dance forms to the subtle grace of certain Asian traditions. One example is Cambodian dance, and who better to talk about it than some of its finest representatives in the United States, the Cambodian American heritage. We are honored to have with us Madame Saman Tess, Artistic Director of the Dance Troupe of Cambodian American Heritage and the Khmer Classical Dance Ensemble. Madame Tess was a National Endowment for the Arts Heritage Fellow and a former member of the Cambodian Royal Ballet. And with us too, Gary Marco, the Program Administrator with Cambodian American Heritage. Welcome to the Coffee House. I am so honored to have you here. It is a real privilege to meet you tonight.
Thank you.
Can you start, Madam Tess, by just telling us a little bit about your own beginnings, how you started with your dancing, and then how you ended up here in the United States?
Yes, I came in with my uncle. He was ambassador in the United States in 1971. Then I get married with my husband, and we stay here. And a couple of years later on, I heard about the communists took over, and they killed a lot of my teacher, and that's very sad. That I heard about. That's almost the teacher is died a lot. I don't know how many
they killed that time, but that it make me feel like I want to build teaching my student
Here.
in United States in here.
Now, when you first, how old were you when you first began dancing?
I was 14 years old. It's kind of late to start classical dance, but I was so very flexible, too soft. And my aunt, she was teaching, master teacher in Royal in Phnom Penh.
In Phnom Penh. And at that time, you were dancing in the palace, right?
Yes.
Because this form of dance
Yes.
was basically performed, as I understand it, in the palace.
Yes.
So I'm going to come back to it in just a moment, Madam Tess, but let's talk to Gary for just a second. First of all, Gary, tell me, how is it that you found Madam Tess?
I have the pleasure of working with her husband. Her husband and I have known each other since 1980, and over the course of that relationship, I started to become interested in their program. First by just being out in the audience watching it unfold in front of me, and then later on her husband Sarum came to me and asked me to help him out with the English narration of their Cambodian New Year program. They observe New Year in the month of April. And I showed up at where they rehearse here in the Washington area at the Fairlington Center in Arlington, and just got into it and have been doing it really since 1995.
Well, I want to make sure that people understand that, first of all, you have extraordinary training and were an incredible dancer in Cambodia, and then through circumstances were able to be in this country actually before the war began. Is that correct?
She was here before it started.
Maybe you, Gary, can just catch us up a little bit more on the historical context so people can understand how terribly important it is that you are here and what you've been able to make happen here since you've come.
Well, as Madame Tess alluded to, in 1975 the Khmer Rouge overran the country, and they considered certain artistic expressions contrary to their revolution, and to such an extent that they persecuted the artists in the Royal Palace and in the University of Fine Arts in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, to the extent that they killed, either directly or through starvation, malnutrition, disease, and torture, about 90% of the artistic community in Cambodia. So there's really only a handful of people here that kept it alive.
And this amazing story that I know about you is that when you got here and you began this dancing, that the dancing became kind of a central focus for the Cambodian community.
That's
here in
correct.
the Washington area.
That's correct.
I want to come back to that, but first maybe we could look, I know we have a tape, and we could take a look at one of the dances, and Madam Tess and Gary, both you might describe a little bit about what we're seeing, but let's take a look and see the dancing.
Now this is the Robam Apsara. It's a story about the divine dancing girl in Apsara named Mira. And she, along with a hermit named Kampu, are supposed to be the birth father and birth mother of the nation that we know of as Cambodia. And this scene that you see being choreographed and danced here is the Apsara Mira with her handmaidens in Mira's garden, if you will. The girl in the white and gold top is Devi Yim, a superior dancer, one of our master teachers, a graduate of the University of Fine Arts in Phnom Penh. She is considered to be one of the best at this particular dance.
Now, Madam Tess, did each of these movements have a meaning? Is that how, in classical forms, would you say that there's a language that each of these?
Yes, this is called you fly or you run. You know, the move, that's pound the hand. And to go.
It's so beautiful. It takes an amazing amount of work to be able to perform this.
Oh yes, it's trained a long time to be very flexible.
This is a life art. You spend your whole life perfecting the choreography, the individual dances in the repertoire.
That's so beautiful.
Most children start from 7 years old.
And you have a lot of students here now studying
Yes.
this form, right?
From 4 years old up to 28 in our group right now.
We have about 40 dancers total, built around Madam Tess, Davy Yim, Suchita Ung, Suwani Chun are the 4 principal master dancers.
And all of these rehearsals happen here in our area, yes?
Yes, and along with Master Chum Nyek, who teaches the traditional music.
Oh, look at that beautiful set.
All the beautiful flower on the back of the hair.
It takes quite a long time to get the women dressed too, by the way.
Wow, it's beautiful. I'm realizing that we have so little time left to talk, but I just want people to know that they have this wonderful resource in our area that they can come and see you perform. They can check your website.
That is correct.
And I hope they will. What, can you just quickly give us the website?
www.cambodianheritage.org.
That's wonderful, thank you. Before we finish up, can you tell us about where you all have been traveling?
We were in New York this year for a special benefit for Friends Without a Border, and we did a wonderful event in East Lansing, Michigan for the National Folk Festival. Just a wildly enthusiastic reception by the American community for Madam Tess and the other master dancers who performed there.
I've been performing outside United States, like Egypt, South Africa, Turkey, and Canada, and Hawaii.
She's been all over the place.
The thing that I really want people, I hope, to understand is that you are really a national treasure. What you've done for Cambodian art and what you've done for dance, and we in Washington are so lucky to have you here, and I just hope that people will read about you, look you up, come see the performances, see the beautiful work that you're doing, and understand just how extraordinary an art form it is and how much we can come to understand each other through our dances. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Alas, that's all the time we have. Many thanks to Madam Tess and Gary Marco for joining me in the coffee house and sharing some of the rich traditions of Cambodian dance. Still to come, author Patricia Elam. I'm Liz Lerman, and this has been In Step.
Look at the torn black corduroy, the loose button sitting in the palm of her little hand. It's one of those riveted kinds they put on overalls, the kind without any holes. You say, I can't fix that, and turn back to your computer screen, the magazine article you're writing. But she's still there, with her sweet, high-pitched voice, outstretched hand. What else is she supposed to do? When she's in bed asleep, or at least giggling in the dark with her cousin, you choose strong black thread, your sturdiest needle. If it was yours, it would be 3 stitches and you're out. But for her, you make many tiny stitches, close together and reinforced on both sides. You go upstairs. Listen to the whispers squeaking out from behind the closed door. Hang her overalls on the doorknob where she'll find them. In the morning, She won't examine the sutured fabric, marvel at the flatness of the seams. She'll toss them in a corner, forget how easy it is to tear her favorite outfit, playing rough with boys.
Welcome to Writer's Block at the Coffee House. The novel is the axe that breaks the frozen ice between us, said Franz Kafka. And certainly the novel exposes relationships in a way shorter fiction does not. Characters have more room to develop, connecting the reader with the writer's imagination in an intimate way. Writer Patricia Elam demonstrates this in her new novel, Breathing Room. Relationships between men and women, between mothers and teenagers, and between friends are the subject here. She cuts through the frozen ice so many of us experience, thanks to polarization around sex, race, and class. Patricia Elam has been a commentator for National Public Radio and CNN. Her work has appeared in Essence, Newsday, Emerge, and The Washington Post, among other publications, as well as in literary magazines and anthologies. She has been the recipient of the O. Henry Award for short fiction. She has also worked as a lawyer and currently teaches at Goucher College in Baltimore and the Duke Ellington School of Performing Arts in the district. She is also the mother of 3. Patricia Elam lives in Washington, D.C. Breathing Room is her first novel. Thanks for joining us in the Coffee House.
Thank you.
Breathing Room is about sort of a love affair between girlfriends, yes?
Yes, although not a sexual.
Not a sexual love affair, right.
Yes, very good friends. 2 women who actually meet at Howard University, become great friends, and then their friendship kind of changes.
And they're Norma and...
They're Norma and Moxie. Norma is a photographer. Moxie is a social worker / probation officer.
Okay.
And their friendship changes as they grow older and have families and children. Moxie is a divorced mother of a 15-year-old daughter named Zadi, who's a dancer and who was at a private school in Washington.
Mm-hmm. And Norma has a son.
Yes, Norma's married and has a son, a small son, and is working as a photographer.
Right, and his name is Miles.
His name is Miles.
And these 2 women make different choices in their lives in terms of what they do with those relationships. And Zadi is Moxie's daughter.
Zadi is Moxie's daughter, but she also is loved by Norma.
Right.
Norma really thinks highly of her, and Zadi thinks highly of Norma.
And Zadi, the way that the novel's broken down, would you talk a little bit about it's first person in the diary of Zadi?
Yes, it's third person for Norma and Moxie telling their story, and then Zadi's diaries interspersed throughout. And she sort of, her diary says the dates, and so that sort of helps know what the time frame is and that sort of thing. And she also sort of comments on things that she knows that are going on in Norma and Moxie's life as well as her own.
Okay, and she likes to talk about what she wears in her. Would you give us a taste of?
Sure. She writes down what she wears every day so she won't repeat an outfit too often. Okay, this is an excerpt from her diary. Friday, January 8th, black lycra top, Express classic fit jeans, Timberlands. Dear sister girl, and she calls her diary sister girl. Dear sister girl, still do not have a boyfriend, and I'm only 7 months away from my 16th birthday. I don't plan on being a virgin past 16, so something's got to happen soon. This is an informed decision. I've heard all the talks about abstinence, peer pressure, teen pregnancy, AIDS, and STDs. We had 2 counselors come in and talk to the high school students. One was a lady who works in an AIDS clinic, and the other was a teenager who has AIDS. He did not look like it. Actually, he was so fine. And he gave a good talk, and I know I definitely do not want that situation. I've also watched the PBS tapes about sex Ma rented when I was in junior high, and I've read parts of the article she cuts out of newspapers, photocopies at work, and leaves on my bed because I asked her to stop talking about all that stuff. What people don't realize is that this is a different day and age. Only nerds and religious freaks are going to wait until they get married to have sex. Be for real. Most normal people are going to have sex in high school or college. Some people will do it in junior high and elementary, but I personally think that is way too young. Most of the time, grown-ups don't want us to have sex when we're in high school because they don't want us to have fun. They know that sex is fun, and they want to keep it for themselves as long as they can, because they also know we are younger and in better shape than they are, and will probably have more fun than they can. They want us to wait until we're all old and out of shape like they are. I don't even like thinking about any of my teachers or Ma and Dad having sex. I mean, that is so foul, it gives me a stomach ache for real. Last year, my history teacher, Mr. Jones, married the 11th grade Spanish teacher, and we were talking about them doing it before they got married, and we laughed about it. But they were jive young looking, so it didn't make my stomach hurt. Ma doesn't even talk to any guys on the phone or anything, so I don't have to worry about her. Plus, I should have gotten her the Taibo videotape for Kwanzaa because she needs to seriously work on her arms and her stomach. During Thanksgiving weekend, I was at Dad's, and one night I stayed up really late watching videos and went back downstairs to get something to eat. I went into the first floor bathroom, which is unfortunately next to Dad and Fauna's room. Their door was closed, but through the bathroom wall, when I didn't have the water running, I could hear Fauna making all these mew-mew sounds like a damn kitten, and I could hear Dad moaning. I hate even thinking about it. I couldn't even eat my snack after that. I don't go downstairs late at night anymore when I'm over there.
And Zadie does get involved with a boy who is her mother's.
Actually, yes, one of her mother's clients, unbeknownst to her mother.
Right, right.
Yes.
Which sends up some friction, as what does also Zadie's being in a dance performance and being forced to do what with her hair?
Forced to straighten her hair. Well, her dance teacher is sort of from the old school, and she wants her dancers to look like ballerinas from Europe or something, right. And she wants the hair to be straightened and pulled back into a bun. And Zadie's hair has been natural since she was a child, and her mother demands it to be that way. And so for her to have to straighten her hair is going to be a very big deal that her mother's not going to want to deal with. Mm-hmm. So it causes friction between she and her mother for sure.
And it also, it plays into some of the stuff that's going on between Norma and Moxie too.
Absolutely.
Because Zadie goes to...
Well, Zadie goes to Norma to ask her to talk to her mother about it and try to convince her to let her do it. Plus, Norma's hair is straightened, and Moxie's hair is natural and in dreadlocks. And that's sort of an untalked about conflict in their relationship. So it sort of brings all that kind of stuff up to the surface.
That's what's so interesting about the novel on so many levels, it seems to me, because you've got all these layers of difference and difference in terms of difference that can get in each other's way, that everyone's trying to negotiate at the same time, but particularly among women.
Yes.
But you've got men doing it too.
Yes.
So it's a...
Well, I wanted to explore the complexity of relationships, and oftentimes I think in friendships there are things that we walk on eggshells with each other about because they know they could tip the balance. And so both Norma and Moxie have done that for a long time. But so many things happen to bring everything to the surface, and so they have to really confront their feelings about each other and about some of the different ways they have decided to live their lives, which causes a rupture.
Yes, and between them, and that you read the book wondering if it's going to work out, if they're going to be. We only have a couple of minutes left, but there's also the whole deal with Norma's being involved in an extramarital affair and how Moxie feels about it. And
especially when Moxie learns that it's with a man of another race, a white man. She's very upset about it. Moxie is very Afrocentric in her values and ideals, and is just thoroughly disappointed in Norma to the point where she feels she's unable to continue their friendship.
And Norma's disappointed with her for not being more supportive of her situation.
Yes, because Norma feels that Moxie knows what the situation of her marriage is and should be more supportive even though she's not in agreement with it.
Right.
So it's very difficult for them.
Right. It's a very complicated novel, and also how your dialogue and your teenagers are so real. It's
well, you know, teenagers have a special place in my heart. I just think that they're so alive, some of the most alive people, I think, in our world. And I really appreciate their energy and wanted to represent them authentically. So I I hope that's what happens with Zadie. I hope that's what
Oh,
they feel.
I think there's no question. And the diary is such a immediate, you know, sort of picture into the teenage girl's psyche anyway. So it's really well done. I also think the guys are really well done too.
The guys were a little bit harder for me. I actually had to keep journals as if I were them.
Yeah, I bet you did. That's all the time we have. Thanks to Patricia Elam for joining us in the Coffee House again. Her new novel is Breathing Room. I'm Lisa Page, and this has been Writer's Block.
That's it for this time. See you next time in